It started with letters home. Coded. Nervous letters written by German officers hunkered down in the mountains of Italy in the winter of 1944. They wrote about the brutal stalemate of the Gustav Line, about the cold, the mud, and the endless artillery. But they also wrote about something else. A ghost. A phantom that haunted the rocky ridges and lived in the space between heartbeats. They did not have a name for it, not at first. They just knew its work. An officer, lighting a cigarette in what he thought was a safe position, would suddenly drop, a neat, single hole drilled through his helmet. A radio man, calling in coordinates, would slump over his set, silenced mid-sentence. A machine gun team, the linchpin of their defense, would be systematically dismantled in under a minute. Gunner, loader, spotter, each taken out with a single, perfectly placed shot from an impossible distance. The shots came from nowhere and everywhere. They seemed to defy physics, ricocheting off rocks or coming from angles that made no sense. The soldiers gave it a name whispered in fear over lukewarm coffee and stale bread. They called it Das Flüstern, the whisper. Because you never heard the shot that killed you. You only heard the whisper of the bullet as it passed through the man next to you. The German command, masters of logic and reason, initially dismissed it as battlefield paranoia, a lucky shot, a skilled Allied marksman. But the reports kept coming. High-value targets were being eliminated with surgical precision, crippling command and control. The whisper was not just killing soldiers. It was dissecting the German war machine, piece by bloody piece. It targeted medics, knowing that watching a man bleed out was more demoralizing than a quick death. It targeted sergeants, the backbone of the infantry, causing chaos in the ranks. This was not random. This was intelligent. It was personal. So, they sent their best. A man named Heinrich Kessler, a decorated Scharfschütze from the Eastern Front, a man with over 200 confirmed kills and ice in his veins. His mission was simple: hunt down and kill the Whisper, and prove that this ghost was only a man. Kessler was a predator, a master of camouflage and patience. He spent days on a frozen mountainside, observing, waiting, studying his unseen enemy's patterns. And he found one. The Whisper preferred to strike just after dawn, using the long morning shadows to conceal its position. The shots always came from high ground, and the escape route was always planned to perfection. Kessler was impressed. This was no ordinary soldier. This was another master of the craft. But who was the Whisper? It was not a man. It was not a grizzled veteran hardened by years of war. The Whisper was an 18-year-old girl named Sarah Washington. She was 5'3", barely 100 pounds, with kind, quiet eyes and a gentle demeanor that made the other soldiers in her platoon, the segregated 92nd Infantry, treat her like a kid sister. They did not know her secret. They did not know that this quiet girl from the swamps of Louisiana, who helped the medics and wrote letters home for illiterate soldiers, was the most dangerous predator in the entire Italian theater. She had joined the army as a mechanic, hoping to do her part, but a sharp-eyed officer at a training range had seen something extraordinary. He saw her pick up an M1903 Springfield rifle, a weapon almost as tall as she was, and place 10 rounds in a playing card at 500 yards. He saw a focus, a stillness, a preternatural ability to read the wind and calculate the drop. He saw a weapon. So they gave her a unerdal scope and sent her to the mountains, a place where a single, well-aimed bullet was worth more than a platoon of men. They never asked her why she was so good. They never asked about the hunting accident that had taken her father and older brother when she was 12, or how she had spent the next 6 years hunting alone in the bayou to feed her family, becoming more a part of the swamp than the gators themselves. They did not know that every time she looked through her scope, that she was not just aiming at a German uniform. She was aiming at the bankers who had taken her family's farm. She was aiming at the sheriff who had called her father a lazy bum. She was aiming at a world that had told her she was worth less, that she was expendable. And with every squeeze of the trigger, she proved them wrong. Now, her greatest test was here. She knew she was being hunted. She could feel it. A change in the rhythm of the mountain. A silence where there should be noise. A shadow that moved when it should not. The master from the Eastern Front was here for her, and on the frozen, windswept peaks of the Gustav Line, two of the deadliest snipers on the planet were about to play a game where the only prize for second place was a shallow grave. What do you think goes through a hunter's mind when they know they are also the prey? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Kessler chose his nest with the chilling precision of a master architect designing a tomb. It was a place where art and murder became one. For 2 days, he'd observed the American lines through his powerful Zeiss scope, not looking for a target, but for a pattern. He found it in a seemingly insignificant cluster of rocks on a forward slope, a position the Americans used as a listening post at dawn. It was a fatal habit, and Kessler's entire strategy was built on exploiting the fatal habits of others. Under the cover of a moonless night, he moved. He did not just occupy a position, he became part of it. He spent 6 hours building his hide, a sniper's nest so perfect it was invisible even to himself. He used local rock, mud mixed with snow to match the exact color of the terrain, and a scavenged Italian camouflage net that blended seamlessly with the sparse, frozen vegetation. His position gave him a commanding view of the American-held ridge nearly 1,000 yards away, a distance he considered a comfortable mid-range shot. He was a creature of absolute patience. His heartbeat was slow, his breathing shallow. The cold was a distant acquaintance, not an enemy. He entered a state of hibernation, a trance-like focus where the entire world ceased to exist outside the circular frame of his rifle scope. And then he set his bait. It was a classic move, a page taken directly from the Scharfschützenfibel, the German sniper's Bible. He had a corporal low crawl to a position 200 yards to his left and rig a simple mannequin, a stick draped with a greatcoat, an officer's cap perched on top, positioned to look like an officer recklessly observing the German lines through binoculars at first light. It was crude, but effective. He knew the whisper was good, but he also believed every soldier, no matter how skilled, had a thread of arrogance. The temptation to take out a high-value target, to add another notch to the stock, was a powerful drug. Kessler was not watching the bait. That was an amateur's mistake. He was watching the area around the bait. His crosshairs were trained on a small, gnarled pine tree on the opposite ridge, a spot he had identified as the most likely firing position for a sniper looking at his decoy. He had already calculated the windage, the bullet drop, the Coriolis effect. His finger rested lightly on the trigger of his scoped Carabiner 98K, the stock warm from his own body heat. All he had to do was wait for the ghost to appear. He was so confident, he even allowed himself a small internal smile. The hunt was almost over. On that same ridge, Sarah Washington lay motionless. She was not in the gnarled pine tree. She was not anywhere near it. She was 50 yards to the right, wedged in a narrow fissure between two rocks, a space so tight she could barely move. It was an uncomfortable, tactically imperfect position. And that's why she chose it. Anything that looks too perfect, a perfectly placed log, a perfectly clear patch of water, is a trap. That gnarled pine tree was a perfect sniper's nest. It was textbook, and she knew, with a certainty that went bone deep, that the German hunter was watching it. She had seen the decoy officer go up an hour before dawn. It was a clumsy, obvious lure, but she was not looking at the lure. She was looking at the artist. She scanned the opposite mountainside, but not like a soldier. She was not looking for a man or a rifle. She was looking for something wrong. A patch of snow that was too uniform. A shadow that did not move with the sun. A rock that had no business being there. She saw nothing. And that, more than anything, confirmed her suspicion. The German was a true master. He had not just found a hiding spot. He had created one. He had assimilated into the landscape. So she stopped using her eyes and started using the mountain. She closed her eyes, letting the unerdal scope rest on the rock beside her. She listened, not just for sounds, but for the absence of sound. The birds in the valley below had been singing their dawn chorus, but now, a section of the forest was silent. Something had disturbed them an hour ago, and they had not returned. She felt the wind on her cheek, a cold, steady breeze moving up the valley. She knew this wind. She knew how it swirled around the peaks. She knew there was one spot, a small bowl-like depression on the opposite slope, that would be almost completely sheltered from it. A perfect spot to take a long-distance shot without having to account for a tricky crosswind. Her eyes snapped open. She raised the scope, not to the gnarled pine, not to the decoy, but to that seemingly empty depression 1,000 yards away. She scanned it, inch by painstaking inch. Rock, snow, a dead bush, rock, another rock, and then she saw it. A single dark spot. It was not a shadow. It was not a rock. It was a hole. A perfectly round, unnaturally dark hole, no bigger than a silver dollar. The opening of a sniper's scope, reflecting no light. A black hole in the fabric of the mountain. He was there. The game had changed. He thought he was the hunter, watching his trap. He had no idea that she was now the hunter, and he was the prey in his own carefully constructed nest. She could take the shot. The distance was extreme, the target minuscule, but it was a shot she could make. But killing him now felt too simple. It was an incomplete answer. This man had been sent for her. He had studied her, learned her patterns. To simply kill him would be like stopping a conversation mid-sentence. She wanted to know who he was. She wanted him to know who she was. She wanted to dismantle his confidence, to peel back the layers of his arrogance, to show him that his textbook, his training, his entire philosophy of war was meaningless against a girl from the swamps of Louisiana. So, she made her first move. She did not aim at the German sniper. She did not aim at the decoy officer. She adjusted her scope, aiming at a small, fist-sized rock located exactly halfway between the decoy and the gnarled pine tree where the German expected her to be. She took a breath, let it out, and gently squeezed the trigger. The crack of the Springfield echoed across the valley. It was a clean miss. The bullet struck the rock, sending up a puff of stone dust, whining off into the distance. To the Germans, it would sound like a nervous, inaccurate shot from a frightened soldier. But to the master hunter across the valley, it was a message. It was a calling card. The shot said, "I see your bait. I see your trap. I'm not falling for it." And then she did something else. She took a second shot, this one hitting the helmet of the decoy, knocking it off the stick. This shot said, "And just so you know, I could have hit it any time I wanted." The duel had begun. Inside Heinrich Kessler's nest, the world was perfectly still. He had seen the puff of dust from the first shot, a clean miss. Arrogant, he thought. Then, a split second later, the crack of the rifle reached him, a sound wave chasing its own creation across the valley. He watched, his eye pressed to the rubber cup of his scope, as the helmet on his decoy puppet kicked up and spun away. He did not flinch. He did not move a muscle. But in the cold, logical fortress of his mind, 1,000 calculations dissolved and reformed into a single, chilling conclusion. She is not in the tree. It was a statement of fact as absolute as gravity. The angle was wrong. The timing was wrong. The first shot was not a miss. It was a declaration of coordinates, a pin dropped on a map, a pin that marked a location halfway between his bait and his trap. The whisper was talking to him. The message was clear, precise, and delivered with a stunning, contemptuous elegance. "I see your little man, and I see your little house. The game you are playing is for children. My game is different." A slow smile touched Kessler's lips, a flicker of genuine professional admiration. This was no ghost. This was an artist. And he, Heinrich Kessler, the master of the Eastern Front, had been played like a novice. Slowly, methodically, he began his retreat. To stay in a compromised nest was suicide, and Kessler was a survivor above all else. He moved backward, dragging his rifle, an inch at a time, until he was deep in the shadows of the rocks. He shed the outer layer of his camouflage, leaving a hollow, lifeless shell. To any observer, it would look as though the sniper was still there, frozen in place. He crawled for 200 yards, his body pressed to the frozen ground, until he reached a deep, ancient ravine that cut a scar down the mountainside. He was a ghost again, vanished from the board. He spent the next hour working his way to a new position, one he had identified days ago as a secondary hide. It was lower on the slope, a miserable spot with a poor field of fire, but it had one crucial advantage. It provided a perfect, oblique view of the American ridge. He was not looking for a kill. Not yet. He was looking for his adversary. He scanned the ridge, not for a rifle, but for a shape. The shape of a woman. His training, his instincts, and the sheer artistry and audacity of the message he had received, it all pointed to something that defied the rigid, masculine logic of war. This was not a soldier's work. It was a hunter's. On the American side, Sarah lay motionless, her own puzzle incomplete. The black hole she had been watching was gone. The nest was empty. She felt a prickle of unease. The German was gone, but he was not running. He was repositioning. He was adapting. The silent, patient chess match had suddenly become a shell game. He was somewhere on that vast grow, snow-dusted mountainside, and the next move was his. She could feel his unseen eyes on her, and for the first time, a sliver of cold fear pierced her professional calm. The other soldiers in her platoon, unaware of the silent duel unfolding above them, saw it as a victory. The enemy sniper had been silenced. They grew bolder. A team of 2 medics, seeing their chance, decided to retrieve a soldier who had been wounded earlier that morning. A young man lying exposed in the no man's land between the lines. It was a brave, foolish act, born of desperation and hope. Sarah watched them through her scope, her heart sinking. It was a trap. "Do not do it," she whispered to herself, her breath fogging the air. "Do not go out there." But they could not hear her. They moved in a low crouch, their Red Cross armbands a vibrant, terrible target against the snow. They reached the wounded man, who was conscious, his face a pale mask of pain. One medic began dressing the wound. The other opened a canteen. And then it came. The sharp, distinct crack of Kessler's rifle from its new, unseen location. But the shot did not hit a man. The bullet pierced the medic's canteen, sending a spray of water into the air. The medics froze, their blood running cold. They understood. It was a warning shot, a cat playing with a mouse, a voice from the mountain that said, "I can see you. I can touch you whenever I wish." They scrambled, grabbing the wounded soldier, trying to drag him back to the relative safety of their trench. They were exposed, terrified, and clumsy. Kessler watched them struggle. He had them. He could have ended all 3 of them with 3 perfect shots. But that was not his goal. His goal was to draw out the whisper. He needed to force her to act. He needed to reveal her position. But he needed to turn her role as a protector into a fatal liability. He took a breath, and his crosshairs settling not on the frantic medics, but on the helpless, wounded man they were dragging. It was a brutal, unspeakable act, a violation of the unwritten code that separated soldiers from savages. He squeezed the trigger. There was no puff of dust this time. The wounded soldier, who had been struggling to help his rescuers, suddenly went limp, a dead weight in their arms. The shot was an exclamation point to the Germans' chilling message. It said, "Your move." Your friends will pay the price for your silence.
Come out and face me, little ghost.
Or I will take them all, one by one. Through the unertal scope, Sarah saw everything. The water spraying from the canteen, the medic's terror, the final, horrifying stillness of the wounded soldier. A wave of pure, cold rage washed over her, so powerful it eclipsed her fear. This was no longer a game. It was no longer a duel between masters. It was an execution, and she was the only one who could stop it. How do you fight a monster who holds all the cards? A monster who is willing to break every rule to win? Do you sink to their level? Or do you find another way? The rage that consumed Sarah was not hot and blind. It was cold, crystalline, and absolute. In that moment, the girl from the Louisiana swamps vanished, and all that remained was the apex predator. She knew what Kessler was doing. He was using her own humanity against her. He was turning her platoon, her brothers in arms, into a string of bait she was honor-bound to protect. He expected her to make a mistake, to take a rash, emotional shot that would expose her position. He was about to learn that her emotions did not make her weak. They made her focused. She needed to do something he would never anticipate. She needed to break his textbook, to rip out the pages and set them on fire. The rules of a sniper duel state that you never, ever abandon a secure, hidden position. So that's exactly what she did. She whispered a single instruction to the BAR gunner in the trench next to her. When you hear my next shot, empty your entire magazine into the rocks 200 yards left of where that last shot came from. Do not stop until you're dry. The gunner, seeing the look in her eyes, just nodded. Then she began to move. She did not crawl backward. She crawled forward. It was an act of pure, calculated insanity. She left the safety of her rocky fissure and began to move down the forward slope of the ridge, in full view of where she knew the German sniper was hiding. But she was not running. She was using a technique her father had called the turtle's crawl, a movement so slow, so deliberate, that it does not register to the human eye as movement. An inch, a pause, another inch. She blended her tiny bomb and agonizing shifts with the gentle sway of the winter grass and the passing of clouds overhead. She became a ripple in the landscape, a piece of terrain slowly rearranging itself. She knew Kessler's scope would be scanning the ridge, looking for the muzzle flash of her next shot. He was watching for an event. He was not watching for a process. From his nest, Kessler's frustration was mounting. The American medics had scrambled back to their line, dragging the body of their comrade. The ridge was quiet again. The whisper refused to take the bait. He was scanning the line of rocks where she had to be, his finger growing tense on the trigger. He needed to force her hand again, and then he heard it, the sharp crack of the Springfield. He saw the muzzle flash, a tiny starburst of light from a position slightly to the right of her previous hide. Got you, he thought, a surge of triumph washing over him. His crosshairs swung to the spot, his mind already calculating the shot. But before he could fire, the world erupted. The deafening roar of a Browning automatic rifle opened up, a torrent of .30 caliber rounds slamming into the mountainside far to his left, nowhere near his position. It was suppressive fire, but it was panicked, wild, and completely inaccurate. It was a fool's move. Kessler sneered. The American sniper was rattled, calling on her friends for a blind, useless barrage of covering fire. And in that moment of supreme arrogance, he made his first and final mistake. He kept his eye pressed to the scope, focused entirely on the chaos of the suppressive fire and the spot where he believed she was hiding, waiting for her to break cover. He failed to follow the first rule of the hunt: always watch your back. Sarah was not in the position where the muzzle flash had come from. The shot had been a diversion, a trick of light and sound. She had rigged her rifle with a long piece of twine tied to the trigger, propped it in a new position, and fired it from 50 feet away while already on the move. While Kessler was distracted by the sound and fury of the BAR, she was closing the distance.
She had cut the distance between them by 200 yards, slithering down the slope to a small, forgotten ledge that was technically in no man's land.
The duel was no longer a long-distance chess match. She had brought it to knife fight range. From her new position, like she had a perfect, oblique angle on Kessler's hide. But she was not looking at it from the front, as he expected. She was looking at it from the side, and she could see everything. She saw the carefully constructed camouflage. She saw the small opening for the rifle, and she saw the side of his head, his eye pressed firmly to his scope, completely oblivious, completely focused on the phantom he thought he had trapped. There was no sound. There was no whisper. There was only the gentle squeeze of a trigger and the silent, instantaneous arrival of a 174-grain bullet traveling at 2,600 feet per second. It struck Kessler just behind the right ear. He never felt it. He never knew he had lost. His world simply ceased to exist. One moment, he was the master hunter, the pride of the Third Reich. The next fall, he was a memory, a ghost on a mountain in a country that was not his own. On the American ridge, the BAR fell silent. The soldiers waited, their hearts pounding, expecting the sharp crack of the German rifle in reply. But it never came. The silence stretched, deep and profound. Minutes later, they saw her. A small figure, rising from the snow in the middle of no man's land, her rifle held loosely in one hand. She walked back toward them, not with the swagger of a victor, but with the quiet, weary steps of a worker at the end of a long, hard day. She climbed back into the trench, her face unreadable. The platoon sergeant rushed over. "Did you get him?" he asked, his voice filled with awe. Sarah looked up at him, her quiet, kind eyes seeming to see straight through him. She said nothing. She just nodded, once. Then she sat down, pulled a cleaning kit from her pack, and began to methodically, obsessively, clean her rifle. The ghost was gone. The girl from the swamp remained.